I think that feelings are largely overrated and that there are physiological indicators that you can't feel, but you can measure.
Welcome to the Spartan Up podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Race.
We are talking about overcoming obstacles. The same way we teach people to get over obstacles on the course, we will teach you here on the Spartan Up podcast to get over obstacles in your mind.
Today, Joe Sena talks to Will Ahmed, founder of Whoop, about what his data reveals about how optimizing your recovery can enhance your performance, and the surprising and life-saving insights their wearable technology uncovered about early COVID symptoms in the PGA Pro Tour. This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Honey Stinger, made with organic honey and delicious ingredients. Use the code HSSpartan2020 at honeystinger.com to save 30% off.
Spartans, we are here for Spartan Up podcast. I'm with Will Ahmed. Did I say Ahmed? Ahmed? How do I say
Yeah,
it?
Will Ahmed. Perfect.
Founder of Whoop. When did you found Whoop?
2012. Yeah, it was my senior year at Harvard.
You do a lot of hard work as a kid. I asked because I have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, and I think it's every parent's dream to have their kid go to a top school. And I just wonder, like, how were you parented? How did you get there?
I mean, I don't have kids yet, but I feel like that would be the most important thing that I would encourage to parents or young people out there is just learn to develop a sense of curiosity and an eagerness to learn.
And how about fitness? Did fitness play a big role in your life?
I was always obsessed with sports and exercise. I was probably playing 12 sports when I was 8 years old, everything. And in some ways, I think maybe young athletes are specializing too young today. Whenever you hear about a 12-year-old who's going to be a pitcher for the rest of their life, that always scares me because it's like, okay, you're going to have surgery at age 16. I ended up playing squash at Harvard, and I was captain of the Harvard squash team. And that's really where I got into this whole idea of continuous health monitoring and figuring out a better way to optimize performance. I was someone who used to overtrain. So you know that well, Joe, but you get fitter and fitter and fitter, and then all of a sudden you fall off a cliff. And so for me, it was really figuring out what are the different things that you can measure about the human body to train optimally. How do you prevent overtraining, undertraining, injury? How does sleep and recovery fit into the mix? And I just did a lot of research. I read something like 500 medical papers, and ultimately that became the business plan for Whoop.
It's funny because I'm meeting a lot of successful young people that played squash, and my kids wrestle, but maybe I picked the wrong sport. Maybe they gotta do squash.
Wrestling's good as long as they don't get too weird about their weight. That the whole cutting weight thing is a real physiological experience. I look at a lot of things through the lens of your body now, and if you cut weight effectively, it can be okay, but if you cut weight wrong, it can really screw up your body.
What would explain right and wrong on cutting weight? Because I have a wrestling practice going on right below me, so I could literally take your learnings and walk downstairs and say, all right, kids, I just spoke to the Whoop guy, and he said.
The first thing is you want to make sure that you're hydrating properly throughout it. A lot of cutting weight is actually dehydrating your body. And what's interesting about Whoop is we've seen the people who, when they cut weight ineffectively, their body looks like upside down. Like they can't sleep effectively. They have these red recovery scores for a couple days in a row. And the problem with that's also when you're trying to peak. And if you have like 2 red recoveries in a row leading into a wrestling match, it's almost like the equivalent of not having trained. You'd almost have been better off not training because your body's so run down, it's not going to be effective.
No, I'm fortunate. I've been around a bunch of Olympic wrestlers, and they said all the data they've looked at, not data like you deliver on your device, but data on like just talking to people anecdotally throughout the years, those that don't cut weight actually perform better, even though they're fighting at a higher weight class.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me just based on some data sets that I've seen on folks who cut weight, because if you do it really in an extreme way, it just causes a physiological response that takes, again, a couple weeks to bounce back from, let alone 24 hours.
I'm a self-proclaimed Flintstone, right? I've been to all the biohacking conferences. I speak, hang out with Ben Greenfield, Tim Ferriss, all these people. I just like carrying rocks up the mountain. You know, I get really tired and fall
Yeah.
asleep. And my thing is, like, we've lived on this planet as a species for a really long time. We haven't had all these gadgets. And I don't know, are we overthinking it? I've had the Aura ring. I got a patch on my arm right now. The levels guy showed up and he wants me to check my glucose, all this stuff, right? And I'm not taking anything away from the Whoop. A lot of people are speaking really highly of your product, but just help me get my head around it. The guy that carries rocks, that that we can't just listen to our own body.
Well, in general, I think that feelings are largely overrated, and that there are physiological indicators that you can't feel, but you can measure. You know, there's this idea that there's secrets that your body is trying to tell you that you can't feel. And, you know, you strike me as someone who's very self-motivated, perhaps more self-aware than the average consumer, perhaps better at listening to your body than the average consumer. All that said, at some point in your life, there will be something that's going on in your body that you can't feel. And the reality is that continuous health monitoring can help catch it. Now, the moment of COVID-19 is, I think, actually shifting consumer psychology around this, because all of a sudden you have a global pandemic because there's a virus that literally I could be carrying and not feel. And I could go give to my grandmother and it kills her, right? And the reality is that there are things that are going on in my body when I have a virus like COVID-19 that can alert me that something's up. I mean, we just published a ton of research specifically on COVID-19, and we were able to find that the people who have COVID-19 have this crazy off the charts respiratory rate. I mean, like it jumps off the page. So on average, a respiratory rate, you know, it's breaths per minute. We take it while you're sleeping. On average, someone probably has a respiratory rate of between 10 and 20 breaths per minute. And it's a really boring statistic. It never changes. So I'll give you an example. Like golf came back early, right? PGA Tour golfer named Nick Watney, who'd been wearing Whoop for 10 months. Every day he has the same respiratory rate, 14, 14, 14. And he wakes up one day, and it's the day of the tournament, and he has a respiratory rate of 18. It had just jumped off the page. And we had published all this research showing that an elevated respiratory rate could be an indicator of COVID-19. And so he goes to see the doctors and he says, look, I've got this elevated respiratory rate. I feel fine. I think maybe I should be tested again. And they said, you know, you're cleared to play. You tested negative 2 days ago. You're fine. And he forced them to test him. And sure enough, he tested positive for COVID-19 and he was able to quarantine and, you know, in the words of Justin Thomas, stop the spread of COVID-19 across the entire tour, because he would have played the next 3 days. And that's one very specific example, but I think it reflects the power of continuous monitoring, you know, and in some ways, the most driven people actually have the biggest risk to thinking that they can feel it, because a driven person is good at having their mind tell them that they're fine even when they're not. You know, you can overcome a lot by having a powerful mind, but at some point it forces your body to crash. That's what happened to me as a college athlete. I kept telling myself I was fine, and I would just push and push and push until all of a sudden I was in a state of overtraining and, you know, effectively felt like I you know, couldn't wake up in the morning, or I was fatigued. So I just view, just to close the loop on this, I think that the future of healthcare is using continuous monitoring to be a preventative tool. And we can talk about that in a lot of different contexts, but it's a preventative tool. The problem is that everything today is curative. It's too late. You've had COVID-19 for a week and you've been around, you know, 20 people in that time frame. Okay, well, what if you could figure that out 3 days earlier, 5 days earlier, 7 days earlier? It needs to be preventative.
So it's more Jetsons than it is Flintstones.
That's right.
I don't know if
That's
Jetsons and Flintstones were cartoons when you were a
I'm
kid.
no, I like both. I like both of those cartoons. It doesn't need to be something that you study every second of the day. And in fact, Whoop doesn't have a screen on it. And we very consciously don't have a screen on it because we think that there's enough things in your life that are trying to grab your attention. And we really want Whoop to be something that you check in with a couple times a day, just to have a sense for what's going on. And I also think, I mean, we've talked more about general health, but I think sleep is another massive area that society at large can improve on. And you can really only manage sleep if you measure it. Most people have no idea how good they are at sleeping. I mean, they'll say, oh, I'm not a great sleeper, or I'm a great sleeper, or I only need 6 hours, or whatever. But the reality is you just measure your body for like even a week, and all of a sudden you've got these new baselines to figure out what are certain things I can tweak to improve my quality of sleep. And that's a third of your life. It would be a real shame to go a third of your life without having some lens into how you can improve it.
Yeah. So, and I'm purposely poking you, right? Because
Sure.
there's a lot of non-believers out there, and so I take the other side on stuff. So I started tracking my sleep 3 or 4 years ago. I'll try everything for a little while, and I'm tracking it. I'm living in Japan, and you're exactly right. What ended up happening was, oh my God, and these are obvious things I'm about to say. I mean, I'm an idiot for not even knowing this before.
Sure.
Like, oh, I got to put my phone on airplane mode. I sleep better when it's on airplane. Oh, there's got to be no lights on in the room, and I sleep. Oh, if I go to bed earlier and it's cooler and so after about, let's call it 60, 90 days, I felt like I've made a bunch of tweaks that are really enhancing my sleep, and they've carried throughout my life since living in Japan. However, the other side was, I got to a point, and maybe it's just because I'm a sicko, I got to a point where I didn't want to know in the morning if I got a good night's sleep or not, because it would actually affect the way I was thinking that day. Like, oh, I didn't get any sleep last night. And I rather muscle through, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I view it as information is power, and you have to just come up with the right mindset for how to approach it. If I wake up with a red recovery, I'm not going to tell myself I'm going to be a loser today or I'm going to be a failure today. I'm just going to tell myself, okay, my performance today will be in spite of the status of my body. And the reason I do think it's empowering to know a certain day where you're run down is it can also give yourself a break in some ways to recognize, okay, well, maybe today isn't the day I have to do my PR on the deadlift, or maybe today isn't the day I need to work 13 hours or make some of the most important decisions for my business. Look, you can still do those things. You can still try to do those things. I'm not telling you not to. But for me, I think a huge source of empowerment to understand the days where my body is more naturally ready to take it on versus not.
No, that's fair. And I've got a lot of smart friends that are really physically fit that are actually wearing your device and loving it. So so I agree with that. I'm just I'm less techie, but everything you're saying is obvious and accurate. Let's talk about some of the things you track besides respiratory rate.
Sure.
So you track strain.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Honey Stinger. Honey Stinger is made with organic honey and delicious ingredients. Honey Stinger's waffles, energy chews, gels, and bars give you the fuel you need to push harder, go further, do all the things that we do as Spartans. For training and racing, you need convenient nutrition that tastes great and works. Honey Stinger is Spartan's official on-course nutrition. It's made with real honey. Honey Stinger started with a simple plan: wholesome ingredients, great taste, and, of course, honey. Why does Honey Stinger use honey? Using an ingredient engineered by nature, not in a laboratory, it has its benefits. In fact, the less you mess with Mother Nature, the better. That's why they're committed to the True Source Honey Pledge. And they've got a special code just for our audience. You can save 30% with the code HSSpartan2020. That's HSSpartan2020 at honeystinger.com to save 30% off, just for our Spartan Up podcast listeners.
Let's talk about some of the things you track besides respiratory rate.
Sure.
So you track strain?
So Whoop measures 5 metrics, 50 to 100 times per second. We collect heart rate variability, ambient temperature, accelerometry, and respiratory rate. And we use various different data points to help you understand really 3 main pillars. The first is around strain, which you can think of as the intensity of a workout or the intensity of your overall day, really any period of time, how much strain you're putting on your body. Recovery, which we think of as how prepared your body is for strain, how prepared is your body to take it on today. And lastly, sleep, which of course is a very important component into a lot of things in your life, but in particular recovery. When it comes to strain, we're primarily looking at cardiovascular load over a period of time. So what does that mean? If you're in a max heart rate state for an hour versus a max heart rate state for 3 minutes, that's going to put more strain on your body. Like the more time that you spend in elevated levels of your heart rate, the more strain you're accumulating on it. And so what it allows you to do is understand any period of time, how much, stress or strain you've put on your body. And what you'll also find is that there's psychological stressors that are affecting your body as well. And so that's really the strain measurement. Recovery is something that you wake up every morning with 0 to 100% red, yellow, green. And that is effectively telling you how prepared we think your body is for strain. So if you had, say, a red recovery, we might suggest less strain. And if you have a green recovery, we would suggest you really take it on for the day.
I assume you're looking at everybody's data set to try to figure out what works and what doesn't when you look at, I don't know, how many people are on Whoop right now?
Well, we don't disclose that publicly, but it's hundreds of thousands of people. So we have a pretty meaningful data set at this point. Yeah. When
you look at hundreds of thousands of people, I would imagine you're able to extrapolate some things and say, hey, people that do this perform better. Like what are you seeing?
So a lot of really interesting things, and let's frame them around some of these different pillars. So let's start with sleep. So one other component that Whoop has, just as some background, is we've got something called the Whoop Journal, and what this does is it allows you to input a lot of different things that you're doing in your daily life, or taking supplements, diets, behaviors. So meditation, are you doing that? Are you taking melatonin or magnesium before bed? Ambien, like heavy sleep drugs? Are you sharing your bed? Are you having sex before bed? Are you in a dark room or a light room? Do you wear blue light blocking glasses? All this stuff, right? And so what's that? That's allowed us to build a fairly meaningful data set on what are certain behaviors that are productive or unproductive. With sleep, we generally see that the darker the room, the better. We generally see that the colder the room, the better. Most people don't sleep in a cold enough bedroom. We've seen great improvements from blue light blocking glasses. So those are glasses that are effectively blocking all the blue light, which primarily is coming from screen devices, television set, your cell phone. So people who wear those tend to sleep better. We also see a really important phenomenon around sleep consistency. So if you've ever met someone in your life who's like, I only need 6 hours of sleep, really that's all I need. And maybe you're even someone who believes that. It's probably that they need more than that, but the reason that they're getting away with less sleep is they probably have a very structured routine. And it turns out that that routine is actually a huge boost to your circadian rhythm. So going to bed every night at the same time and waking up at the same time, or very close bands of that, we've seen to dramatically improve your slow wave sleep and your REM sleep. So the person who's going to bed at 11 and waking up at 5 every single night is actually getting better sleep than the same person who's going to bed at 11 and waking up at 5 and then going to bed at 12 and waking up at 6 and then going to bed at 10 and waking up at 4, right? So even though it's the same amount of time in bed, the routine associated with it is driving meaningfully better sleep. And back to your earlier...
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. But I think you can only really manage these things if you measure them. because in the back of your mind, you're not actually thinking that closely about what is the exact time I want to sleep. And maybe the time you got in bed wasn't the time you've actually fell asleep. And so people aren't that good at actually, sort of self-analyzing this stuff. The other thing is that certain things have very different effects on people. Wine is a good example. For some people, more than one glass of wine, and all of a sudden they're completely sideways. So their sleep looks terrible. And maybe they thought, oh, it's fine, I can get away with the second or third glass of wine. Other people, wine doesn't even affect that much. And that's a highly personal thing, a highly physiological thing. We've seen similar with eating before bed. Some people, and I would say probably 75% of people, if they eat too close to bed, it dramatically screws up their sleep. Like it meaningfully screws up their sleep. And that's something that I don't know that they would know without measuring it or being conscious of it. So that's an example where a Whoop member is going into their journal and saying, last night I didn't eat close to bed. Tonight I did eat close to bed. And so Whoop then can map at the end of the month, what are the things that helped or didn't help. Travel is very interesting for executives, people who are hyper motivated. Obviously everyone's traveling a lot less right now, but before COVID, it was really interesting to look at travel data too.
This is going to be great. And at the end of this, if it's okay, I want to kind of recap it because people like 7-minute abs, right? Like boom, boom, boom. I got to put on
totally.
blockers, go to bed the same time. Don't drink the wine. Don't get close to bed.
Right.
I agree with you. To manage, you have to measure. So I agree. But I've been believers of the stuff you're saying. What you're doing is confirming that I'm not nuts.
Look, it's possible you already have a perfect routine. I think that
no way is it. It's not perfect, but I do fight with my family, my extended family. Why are we drinking wine? Why are we eating close to bed? Why aren't we going to bed early at the same time? And so your data is proving that this makes sense.
Totally. And the interesting thing about measuring it is it actually can help motivate you to do it, right? Because then you've got a scoreboard.
Just so you know, your little clip I'm cutting and pasting into a text with my in-laws. So here's this Harvard guy that owns Whoop, and he says it's not Joe saying it, it's you saying it, and the data saying it. So what about overtraining and training? What are you seeing there?
So typically, if you go 2 or 3 days in a row of dramatically overdoing your strain relative to your recovery, you're putting your body at risk. So we've seen an increased likelihood of injury when someone is taking on high strain. So strain on Whoop is 0 to 21. It gets exponentially hard. So going from an 18 to a 19 is much harder than going from a 9 to a 10. Okay? People who do an ultra marathon will get like a 20.5. People who do a marathon will get a 20.3, right? So it's an exponential curve. I bring that up because if you take on an enormous amount of strain, if you really get to the high end of that scale and your body's run down, you're really testing your body. And so that's where we see people tend to get in a little bit of trouble is if they have a red recovery on Whoop and they take it on big and then the next day they're still run down and then they take it on big again. If you do that a few days in a row, that's where you're putting your body at meaningful risk. And the irony for all you hard drivers listening to this, the irony is actually doing nothing, just resting will make you fitter than taking on that other big day.
So here's a question for you. And again, it's logical what you're saying. I mean, I've been given speeches and people have said, Joe, what do you think about recovery? And my response, which you could push back on, is what are we recovering from? Like, we're not in World War I or II. We're not in Vietnam. Like, we're not cavemen. It's not that friggin' hard what we do every day. So I've been pushing back a little bit on like over recovery, but you're right. If I just biked for 24 hours, right, then I'm going to do a second hard day. It's probably not intelligent, which is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, I would just base it on your body's status. The flip of this is that actually, so let's just take the average consumer for a second. You strike me as someone who's on the high end of fitness. Most people are doing the same level of intensity workout every time they exercise. And that has huge problems. One, it has problems because when you're run down, it's probably too hard. But on the flip side, when your body's dialed, like when you're ready, when you've got a green recovery, when your physiology looks good, you have to hit it hard. You have to crush it, not do the same thing you always do. And so what Whoop does for someone who is trying to get back into shape is it helps them dramatically vary the intensity of what they do. Maybe today's just stretching, you know, but tomorrow when you've got that recovery back, you are going for 2 hours. We're going to push you, right? You know what I mean? And so that's I think it goes back to what you were saying. Yeah, sure, we're not recovering from a world war, but there are moments that your body is primed and there are moments that there aren't, and you have to take two very different paths every day.
You're optimizing. You're optimizing for peak performance for that squash tournament.
So a lot of this also does come back to what do you want? If you're peaking for a marathon and your marathon's on Saturday and you've got a green recovery on Thursday, you don't necessarily want to crush your body on Thursday because you're still trying to peak for Saturday. If you're in a state, though, of training where you want to get fitter, that's where you may be pushing the envelope on strain relative to recovery. So even if you're run down one day, maybe you overdo it, you know? And so that's where it comes back to what your goals are. If it's off-season training, you know, I think you're probably right. You can really just kind of push it. But recognize that if you do it too many days in a row, you're taking on an unnecessary imbalance.
I used to, years ago, do very, very long distance races, you know, 2-3 week long races. And they did studies on folks doing those events, limited sleep, pain after pain after pain, day after day. And what they found was during that period, 1, 2, 3 weeks, the body actually got stronger, which is contrary to what you and I would believe. But the data, they did data analysis. It was actually Discovery Channel did all the work. The data showed you got stronger. Now there was a point where there was diminishing returns, to your point. I don't know if it's after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but at some point you're going to fall off a cliff. You said that early on in this conversation. I've been a believer for 20 years that if me, need to get in shape fast, what I found works, and I'd love to do a study with you on this, is wake up in the morning before you eat. Hopefully you didn't eat too close to bed. Wipe out your glycogen levels, so do something with high intensity. Follow that with like 2 hours of low but hard intensity. So in other words, throw a weight vest on and walk up the mountain for 2 hours. You're completely out of glycogen. You've got no food. You can drink as much water as you want. For me, that has been the fastest way for anybody around me to get in shape. And I'd love to study, I don't know why that is.
Sure.
I'd love to study that though, because I suspect I'm onto something there, but I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And the thing I'll just add is that, like, I think it's impossible to look at fitness and even the best process for improving fitness without also looking at sleep. Because the amount of slow wave sleep, for example, that you get, that's when your body's producing 95% of its human growth hormone. So the reason that Hell Week, you know, or Buds for the Navy SEALs is so hard is that it's sleep deprivation, right? They're not building their body back up. And so one of the best ways to get fit quickly is to do an exercise like you just described, but then to really rest that night. Like spend 8-9 hours in bed, and all of a sudden your body's going to be able to build back up.
All right, here's the big question. This is the one I'm going to send over to my wife and the in-laws. What are the 3, 5, 10 things, looking at all this data? You've been wearing one. How long have you been wearing one?
6 years.
You've been wearing one 6 years, right? You've really honed in on this. What are things before people get a whoop that they could do that would dramatically change their lives in a positive way?
Okay, so first thing around sleep, it's really important to go to bed and wake up at a consistent time. So sleep consistency is paramount. On top of that, you want to have a cold room and you want to have a dark room. You also, you want to make sure that you're limiting alcohol consumption. Just in general, alcohol dramatically decreases your slow wave sleep, your REM sleep, your heart rate variability. You want to be careful how much food you're eating right before bed. In general, not eating food before bed is better. You want to pay close attention to the status of your body when you take on a lot of exercise. So in general, people are doing the same workout too consistently. It should either be much lighter or much heavier, depending on the status of your body. You also want to start paying close attention to your psychological stress levels. And one thing that we've seen meaningfully improve for Whoop members is meditation and breath work. And those are two things that can improve the rate at which you fall asleep. They can improve the way you feel, and they can increase your heart rate variability.
You know, my mom was pushing meditation back in the 70s, and it was kind of a little weird. It was bohemian back then. People, you know, there was no yoga journals or Whole Foods back then. And what she taught me to do, because I wasn't that into it, was meditate right before bed. So I meditate as soon as I lay down, and I wake up the next day. It's fantastic.
That's a good strategy.
It's a good strategy. But you're awesome. Thanks for taking the time. And
Thank you, Joe. This has been fun. I think you should wear Whoop for like a few weeks and see how it feels. And I think what you'll find is that because it doesn't have a screen and because it's really lightweight, you can pay attention to it as much or as little as you want. I mean, this thing has a 5-day battery life. You could wear it for 4 days without even knowing it's on your body, without looking at anything, you know? So I think that data becomes power. You just have to use it in the right way. For you, that might be a very light touch. For other people, it's, you know, checking it 5 times a day. But that's up to you, and that's up to Whoop users. The only thing I would add is, you know, for people listening to this who want to learn more about the product, they can find us at whoop.com, WHOOP.com.
This episode of Spartan Up is brought to you by Honey Stinger, made with organic honey and delicious ingredients. Use the code HSSpartan2020 at honeystinger.com to save 30% off.